Hello and welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Let's take up the analysis of today's The Hindu newspaper. In his address to the nation yesterday, the Prime Minister has said that the lockdown would be extended until the 3rd of May. This extension had become essential considering the rising number of cases, and any premature withdrawal from the first phase of the lockdown would have led to an exponential increase in the number of cases. So by considering these factors, and by taking into account the opinion of the state governments, the central government has decided to extend the lockdown until the 3rd of May under the provisions of the Disaster Management Act of 2005. The Prime Minister has said that during the second phase of the lockdown, an intensive containment strategy would be implemented by the central government, the state government and the district administration in the hotspots where outbreaks have been reported. Until the 20th of April, a very strict containment strategy would be enforced in these identified hotspots. And the Prime Minister has also offered an incentive to these hotspots. He has said that the government will consider relaxing some of these restrictions after the 20th of April, provided if the containment strategy works and if it succeeds in containing the outbreak. So basically, withdrawal from the lockdown and restoring freedom of movement and mobility would be entirely dependent on how successful our containment strategy would be in these hotspots. Apart from outlining the lockdown strategy, the Prime Minister has called upon the citizens to follow these 7 steps during the second phase of the lockdown. He has asked the citizens to take special care of the elderly people, especially those who are suffering from comorbid conditions, as they are the most vulnerable to coronavirus. He has called upon the citizens to strictly follow the lockdown guidelines and social distancing norms and mandatorily make use of masks every time we step out of the house. He has asked the citizens to enhance their immunity by following the suggestions provided by the Ayush Ministry. He has also asked the citizens to download the Arogya Setu app, which makes use of Bluetooth technology to alert the user of any potential contact that he might have had with a COVID-19 patient. This app will also help the government authorities in contact tracing, and it will also help the government to track the movement of COVID-19 patients and suspected cases. The Prime Minister has also asked the citizens to help out the poor families in and around us who might be facing a shortage of essential items. He has also called upon the employers to show some empathy towards their employees and not cut salaries or take away their jobs during this time of crisis. Finally, he has asked the citizens to pay utmost respect to frontline workers such as doctors, nurses, police officers, etc., who are at the front line of our fight against the pandemic. Next, on page number 6, we have an editorial which analyzes the lockdown extension. The editorial says that the lockdown had to be extended to a second phase, and the extension had become inevitable due to the rising number of cases. This extension will help us build upon the benefits of the first lockdown, and it will hopefully provide us the time that is needed to contain the clusters that have broken out in these hotspots. But the editorial cautions the government that this lockdown extension only provides us with a narrow window, and the government would have to work out an orderly exit from the lockdown after the 3rd of May, because any further extension would become economically unviable. As the Prime Minister has rightly said, we are currently prioritizing saving lives over livelihoods. But at some point, we will have to start balancing the two objectives, that is to save lives and sustain livelihoods, considering that the pandemic is here to stay with us for the next 3 to 4 years at least. So going forward, the resumption of few economic activities are needed in order to sustain the economy, but with the strict implementation of social distancing norms in order to contain the spread of the pandemic. So this is the new reality or the new world that we may have to get used to, where limited economic activities would be allowed to function with strict social distancing and periodic lockdowns. Here the editorial appreciates the government for providing an incentive to the hotspots, which promises to relax the lockdown after the 20th of April, provided if the containment strategy works. But for this to happen, widespread testing has to be carried out in the hotspots, along with the strict implementation of standard protocols in order to stop the spread of new infections. But the concern is that India still has one of the lowest rates of testing in the world, and we will have to ramp up testing with the objective of covering each and every household in the hotspot if the containment strategy has to work. Then the editorial says that the central government needs to take steps in order to ensure that the gaps that were noted in the implementation of the first phase of the lockdown is not repeated in the second phase of the lockdown. In the first phase, it had been noticed that the state governments had failed to provide exemption to farmers and the interstate and intrastate movement of essential items despite being directed by the central government. So during the second phase of the lockdown, it is very essential for the central government and the state governments to work in coordination with the enforcement agencies in order to cause minimal disruption to farmers and the movement of essential items. Both the state and the central governments need to ensure that the standing rabi crop, which is on the brink of being destroyed due to the lockdown, is harvested in time and transported to the markets. The gaps that were seen in the implementation of the first phase of the lockdown was mostly because of poor communication on the part of the state governments, and the reported incidents of violent policing is an outcome of lack of clear instructions received by the local enforcement agencies from the state government. So it is the responsibility of the central government to ensure that all state governments fall in line, and the state governments need to carry out periodic follow-ups with the local enforcement agencies. So these are the steps that need to be taken by the center and the states in order to fill the gaps in implementation, at least during the second phase of the lockdown. Then coming to the question of extending the lockdown beyond the 3rd of May, it is quite clear that any such long-term extension would become economically unviable. But at the same time, we have understood that there can be no overnight return to normalcy as well. So as far as the question of saving lives and sustaining livelihoods are concerned, the only available option for the government is to provide for sequential restoration of activity. That is, the government should allow few limited essential economic activities to resume with strict adherence to social distancing norms and restrictions. And whenever a cluster or a hotspot emerges, localized lockdowns can be enforced in order to contain them. So this is going to be the new reality or the new world that we will be living in for the next few years at least, unless and until a vaccine or a cure is developed for the pandemic, or unless and until we attain herd immunity. Now let's take up the next editorial, which analyzes the economic recovery path that is being worked out by the European Union in order to overcome the impact of the pandemic. See, members of the European Union who are a part of the Eurozone, they have come out with a massive economic recovery package in order to save their currency and the regional grouping. The term Eurozone is used to refer to those members of the EU who have adopted Euro as their currency. Last week, the finance ministers of the Eurozone countries have approved a massive emergency rescue package of 540 billion euros in order to help out the affected countries within the Eurozone. Apart from this, the European Union has opened an emergency credit line to allow its members to make emergency withdrawals in order to fight the pandemic. The European Investment Bank has decided to raise its lending capacity in order to increase lending and provide for fresh investments. And the European Commission, which is one of the principal organs of the EU, has launched a 100 billion euro unemployment insurance scheme in order to sustain the livelihoods of those who might be losing their jobs due to the pandemic. And the European Central Bank has announced a program to expand its assets by purchasing around 750 billion euro worth of assets over the next 9 months. These economic recovery measures that are being worked out by the European Union definitely looks very substantial, but the negotiations surrounding these measures have thrown open the divide that exists between the member countries of the European Union, especially with regard to the sharing of burden. These negotiations have brought out the disputes between the stronger and the weaker economies of the European Union with regard to burden sharing. It has also brought out the political disputes that exist between the members of the European Union, and as well as the domestic political disputes that exist within the member countries. For example, if you look at the dispute between Netherlands and Italy, it shows how these negotiations are affecting the stability of the European Union and European solidarity. See, under the European Union, we have a mechanism known as the European Stability Mechanism. Through this mechanism, the member countries can make emergency withdrawals when they are dealing with a financial crisis. But these withdrawals come with a set of conditions. And it is said that these conditions affect the sovereignty of the country. So after the COVID-19 pandemic broke out, under the European Stability Mechanism, a dedicated pandemic credit was set up. And when Italy, which is one of the most affected countries, decided to make a withdrawal from the pandemic credit, Netherlands insisted that Italy has to abide by all the conditions of the European Stability Mechanism. But Italy argued that since this is an unprecedented crisis, these conditions have to be kept aside and member countries have to be supported under the European Stability Mechanism without any conditionalities. So this difference of opinion between the Netherlands and Italy led to a diplomatic standoff between the two countries. And a similar dispute is being seen over the issuance of Euro bond, which is being popularly referred to as the Corona bond. See, in order to raise finances for sponsoring these economic measures, the largest economies of the European Union after Germany, that is France, Italy and Spain, they have proposed the joint issuance of a new type of Euro bond known as the Corona bond. These three countries, which are amongst the top 4 economies of the European Union, they are supporting the issuance of this bond as they are the most affected by the pandemic. But this proposal has not received support from Germany, which is the largest economy of the European Union. Even Netherlands has not expressed support for this proposal because these countries feel that the issuance of a new bond will only increase the debt burden of the Eurozone countries. So in short, the Eurozone countries have managed to work out a substantial economic recovery package through coordination and cooperation. But these negotiations have also highlighted the disputes and conflicts which threaten the stability of the European Union and European solidarity. So this experience of the European Union offers lessons for India, which is also looking at a regional strategy for reviving the South Asian economy through the SAARC platform. Now let's take up a column written by Rajiv Bhargava, in which he illustrates how rumor mongering can polarize a society, especially during times of crisis. In this column, the writer breaks down the anatomy of rumor mongering and the psychology behind it. During any crisis, be it a war or be it riots or be it a disaster, we have always seen a surge in rumor mongering and the circulation of fake news. This trend has been noticed through the centuries, and in some cases, these rumors might have been planted deliberately by a vested group, or in some cases, the rumor might have originated organically without an identifiable source. But either ways, circulation of rumors is inbuilt into human psychology, especially during a crisis, and such rumor mongering can have terrible social consequences on the society. For example, during the 1984 anti-Sikh riots, rumors were circulated that Sikhs were accumulating weapons in gurudwaras around the country. During wars and epidemics in 20th century Europe, rumors were circulated that Jews were deliberately poisoning the wells. Then in 18th century France, rumors were circulated that the upper class were distributing poisonous wheat flour to the lower classes. Now during the COVID-19 pandemic, rumors and fake videos are being circulated, which are trying to show that Muslim shopkeepers and vendors are deliberately trying to spread the virus. In all these cases, it has been noticed that these rumors have gained widespread acceptance and they end up polarizing the society. This is where we need to understand the anatomy of a rumor and how a fake piece of information can end up having a real-world impact. See, any rumor consists of 4 features. First, a rumor will always have a ring of truth attached to it. That is, it is based on half-truth. Because human tendency is to believe anything that is plausible. So the element of half-truth in a rumor makes it plausible and hence believable. Because when we hear something that is completely illogical, we may not believe it. But when something is plausible, then we might end up believing it. So the first feature of a rumor is that it always has an element of truth that has been taken out of context. For example, an old video of a Muslim vendor spitting on a fruit is taken out of context and circulated during the pandemic to make it more believable. Then the second feature of a rumor is that it always has a strong emotion or a passion attached to it, and it exploits the collective psyche of the human beings. When a rumor has an emotional angle or a passionate angle to it, it tends to circulate faster. The third feature of a rumor is that it spreads rapidly, it goes viral, especially during times of crisis. Then the fourth feature of a rumor is that it manifests and changes as it circulates from one person to another. So since time immemorial, rumors have not only been posing a social threat, but they have also been a security threat. And with the emergence of new forms of communication, such as phones, internet and social media, rumors and fake news are increasingly posing a threat to a country's internal security. The creation and circulation of such rumors increases substantially during a crisis because human psyche is driven by herd mentality when faced with an external threat. So when there is a war, or when there is civil unrest, or when there is a disaster, group dynamics comes into action within the community, and the likes in a particular group come into a huddle and treat the unlikes with suspicion. This feeling of suspicion between the likes and the unlikes is mutual, and this increases during times of crisis. So this mentality of human beings, especially during a crisis, creates a fertile ground for the propagation of rumors. As rumors circulate, the mutual suspicion of the likes and the unlikes start coming true, and this will end up polarizing the society. This is how rumor mongering, especially during times of crisis, can have real world social consequences and can pose an internal security challenge to a country. So the writer suggests that one way to tackle rumor mongering is to have restrictive laws in place. When we have laws in place to prevent the circulation of rumors, it will help in punishing the ones who have created and circulated the rumor. But the writer says that such restrictive laws can only have a limited impact due to problems in enforcement. So along with these restrictive laws, we need the leaders of the society to play a role in order to effectively tackle rumor mongering. The writer says that community leaders and democratically elected office holders, such as prime ministers, presidents, chief ministers, etc., they have a key role to play in preventing the spread of rumors. When a dangerous rumor is circulating in the society, especially during a crisis, it is the responsibility of the community leaders and the democratically elected leaders to come out in the open and point them out, and this can be an effective way of tackling rumors. Now let's take up the next article. The Indian Council of Medical Research has recommended the testing of pooled samples in order to increase testing and bring down the cost of testing. See, one of the criticisms that India has faced in its fight against the COVID-19 pandemic is that it has not been testing enough to identify the real spread of the infection. As we discussed earlier, India's testing rate still happens to be one of the lowest in the world. The government has justified limited testing by highlighting the shortage of test kits for such a large population and the costs involved in testing. Over the last couple of weeks, ICMR has been trying to expand testing due to the rising number of cases, and in this regard, it has recommended the testing of pooled samples in order to bring down the cost and time that is involved. See, in pooled sampling, specimens taken from 5 different individuals is clubbed into a single pool. And then, each pool is subjected to the RT-PCR test. And if a pool turns out to be negative, then the individual samples need not be tested, thus saving cost and time. But if a pool turns out to be positive, then the individual samples are tested separately in order to identify the positive cases within the pool. But this testing strategy has been recommended only to those areas or populations where the positivity rate has been more than 5%. That is, pooled sampling will be used only in areas or within populations where more than 5% of them have tested positive. Because this positivity rate indicates that the infection is widespread within the given area or within the given population, and hence there would be an urgent need to scale up testing, and in such cases, pooled sampling will help in reducing cost and as well as time. Then the ICMR has mandated that not more than 5 specimens can be clubbed in a pool in order to prevent dilution and the occurrence of false negatives. Now let's take up the next article. The Survey of India, which is the designated agency for maintaining accurate maps of the country, has contributed to the development of the Arogya Setu app. As we have discussed earlier, the Arogya Setu app has two primary purposes. One, it will help alert the user if he or she has come in contact with a COVID-19 patient by using Bluetooth technology. And two, it will help the government authorities in managing the pandemic. It will help the authorities in contact tracing by tracking the location of the user. It will help the authorities in enforcing quarantine on suspected cases and as well as on confirmed cases. And it will also help the authorities in cluster management and management of the hotspots. But since the application is heavily dependent on tracking the location of the user, it needs to be supported by accurate maps. And this mapping technology and geospatial data has been provided by the Survey of India through its Sahyog mobile application. Now let's take up the practice questions. He was popularly referred to as Deenabandhu and was instrumental in convincing Gandhi to return to India from South Africa. His report on indentured labour in Fiji led to the end of further transportation of Indian labour to the British colonies, and thus the system of Indian indentured labour was formally abolished in 1920. Whom does this description refer to? The correct answer is option B, C.F. Andrews. C.F. Andrews was a Christian missionary, educator and reformer from England who became an integral part of India's national movement. He was sent by Gopal Krishna Gokhale to gain the support of the Indian diaspora in India's freedom struggle, and during one such visit to South Africa, C.F. Andrews met with Mahatma Gandhi and was impressed with his work against the British rule. Then he managed to convince Mahatma Gandhi to return to India and contribute to India's freedom struggle. Later, he would become a close friend of Mahatma Gandhi and as well as Rabindranath Tagore, and due to his immense work in uplifting the weaker sections, Gandhi gave him the popular title Deenabandhu. Then his report on the indentured labour system in Fiji led to the abolishment of the indentured labour system in 1920. This question has been asked because this article on page number 7, which is from 100 years ago, refers to an interaction between Rabindranath Tagore and C.F. Andrews concerning the Jallianwala Bagh massacre. Now let's take up the next practice question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Indian Air Force operates the P-8I long-range maritime patrol aircraft procured from the United States. India is looking to procure the Harpoon Block II air-launched missiles from Boeing that can be fitted onto its P-8I aircraft to enhance India's capability in anti-ship warfare. Amongst the given statements, the second statement is correct, but the first statement is incorrect. This aircraft has been procured by India from the United States, and it is being operated by the Indian Navy, not the Indian Air Force, and it is primarily being used for anti-ship and anti-submarine warfare operations, and as well as to carry out reconnaissance and collect intelligence across the Indian Ocean region. This question has been asked because according to this article on page number 8, the United States has approved the sale of two missiles to India. One is the Harpoon Missile and the other one is the Mk-54 Torpedoes. And the proposed induction of Harpoon will strengthen India's anti-ship capabilities, and the proposed induction of the Mk-54 Torpedoes will strengthen India's anti-submarine warfare capabilities. Now let's take up the next practice question. What is the status of the Great Indian Rhinoceros on the IUCN Red List? The correct answer is option C. It has been listed as vulnerable. Now let's look at the next question. Which of the following statements are correct? The Nameri National Park is located at the foothills of Garo in Meghalaya. It is also declared as a tiger reserve and shares a boundary with the Pakhui Tiger Reserve of Arunachal Pradesh. Amongst the given statements, the first statement is incorrect, so option B is the right answer. See, the Nameri National Park is located at the foothills of eastern Himalayas in the state of Assam. These two questions were asked because according to this article on page number 11, hunting and poaching has increased in the Kaziranga National Park and as well as the Nameri National Park of Assam due to the lockdown. Hunters in the Kaziranga National Park are primarily targeting the one-horned Indian rhinoceros, or also known as the Great Indian Rhinoceros, which has been listed as vulnerable by the IUCN. These rhinos are primarily hunted for their horns, which finds a huge market in China and in Southeast Asia. Now let us take up a practice question from the 2015 prelims paper. Consider the following phenomena. Light is affected by gravity. The universe is constantly expanding. Matter warps its surrounding space-time. Which of the above are the predictions of Albert Einstein's general theory of relativity that are often discussed in media? The correct answer is option D, all the above. Finally, let's take up a couple of mains practice questions. The first question, discuss the measures being taken by the European Union to combat the economic impact of COVID-19. The second question, rumor mongering during times of crisis polarizes the society and threatens the internal security of the country. Evaluate. Kindly write an answer to these questions and post them in the comment section below. So this concludes our discussion for the day. Thanks for watching.